Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special video. Tom and I were chatting on Friday when a news story dropped about a hookup between Ford and Chinese car maker Geely. And maybe we need to get out more, but we were quite fascinated by it. So we thought we'd do a special video just to unpick this. So good morning, Tom. How are you doing?
Morning, I'm good, thank you.
I think we do need to get out more, Tom, don't you?
Well, it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? All this, it's like a soap opera in the car industry.
It is, it is. And I think to help us unpick the soap opera, we are joined by a friend of Electrifying, often known as the godfather of EVs for his work on the Nissan Leaf whilst he was COO at Nissan. You've also gained quite a lot of experience from the turbulent car industry during your time as CEO of Aston Martin, haven't you? Welcome, Andy Palmer. Thank you for joining us.
Hello there. Nice to come in and have a chat.
So Andy, did this news strike you as in fact, let me, before we go into this, should we just unpick the news for those of you that may wonder what we're talking about? So Tom, just outline to us this story that caught our eye on Friday, and we were like, this is really interesting, so we thought we'd make a video about it.
Yeah, so Ford has announced it's entering into a partnership with Geely to produce a new crossover and some new models for Geely too. So they'll be built in Ford's Valencia factory in Spain. That's the place that currently builds the Cougar, but it was originally built 50 years ago for the first Fiesta. And the companies say it will accelerate Geely's auto European expansion and supports Ford's product offensive to bring 5 new passenger vehicles to European showrooms by 2029.
Okay, and is it worth outlining Geely, do we think, as well, just for people that perhaps, you know, there's so many new Chinese brands have come onto the scene here in Europe, in the UK. You'll know Geely as a standalone brand. They've got the EX2, which they're just launching, which was the best-selling car in China last year. They've got a couple of other models as well, both plug-in hybrid and electric. But I think where Geely is interesting is actually about the brands that it owns. So in case you don't know, they own Volvo, it owns Polestar, it owns Lotus, it owns a not insignificant stake in Aston Martin. I think it's around 17%, making Geely the third largest shareholder in Aston Martin. They also own the London Electric Vehicle Company, which makes the iconic black electric London cabs that you will have seen. So they're an interesting company. Andy, what did you make of this news when it dropped on Friday? Because we were both really found there's some really interesting nuances in this.
Yeah, well, look, we're at a point in history which is probably even more profound than when the Japanese came in the 1980s. What you're seeing, of course, is the change from internal combustion engine to electric. That's profound by itself. What you see is a plan that the Chinese manufacturers have been implementing since 1992, actually, which was the first government plan to create new energy vehicles and leapfrog the West. They've updated that plan every 5 years, and they've obviously succeeded in terms of their domestic production, and they're now pushing ahead very much on international scale. So you see them targeting, in particular, the EU and Europe because they can't go to China. So their international expansion is predominantly focused on the EU, and you've seen the EU reacting to that by stating that they need local content. So doing much the same that the EU did to the Japanese in the 80s, which is you need to have local production. That's now being forced upon. One could argue quite rightly that if you want to sell cars here, you need to build them here. And so the natural conclusion of that is that these car companies, and you've seen Chery recently announce building cars in Sunderland, the Nissan Sunderland plant, for example, and now you're seeing basically Geely looking at Valencia. You can also see the old Nissan plant in Barcelona being used. So what you're seeing is an approach to manufacturing vehicles in Europe for Europe in order to avoid the tariff barriers that would otherwise be put in place. So I think what you're seeing is a theme. I'm not sure that all the themes will work. Some will, some won't. There's some nuances and some differences from the way that the Japanese approach things, but this is definitely a trend.
I think what's interesting for me is that it's Ford in particular, because Tom, we've been talking about Ford for quite a while, just as a company that we've been unsure about its direction, about what it's doing with EVs. Of course, it axed the Fiesta, and that's now coming back. I think it's fair to say that, they've seen market share shrink massively in Europe, and they are not a company that is perhaps, the company they once were here.
Well, yes, their market shares halved in the past 10 years. But what's interesting for me, and Andy, I'm sure you've got an opinion on this, is that they've got the Capri and the Explorer, which are developed with Volkswagen, and the new Fiesta is going to be with Renault. And now they've got yet another partnership. Now that's got to get very complicated, isn't it? I think it's more traditional, is it, in the motor industry, to go with one partner and just to share lots of platforms with them. But this seems strange to me. Does it seem odd to you?
I guess it's a low barrier to entry when you work with somebody else. The industry, as you know very well, Tom, calls it cross badging. It's not really just swapping badges, but it's using a lot of the same architecture. And my experience of cross badging, and I've done a lot of it in my time, not least between Renault and Nissan, is that it gives you fast entry to market, relatively low capex, but it's not profitable because you're paying two sets of margins basically. It also constrains you. And any platform share, if I take an example of a Nissan, the platform constrains around 100 points in the car, which is fixed, either fixed for the commonality and therefore the cost reduction, or fixed because of the factory that it's going down. And when you fix those points, you constrain the designers because the designers can only draw lines between those points. So basically, I think it's a strategy for re-entry for Ford, but I doubt whether it's a sustainable strategy in the long term, because generally speaking, it's not that profitable.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if we look at the badge sharing that's happened recently between Nissan and between Renault, Andy, and we look at the Nissan Micra and the Renault 5. And I mean, I think we were all pretty taken aback when we saw just how closely those two cars were linked. So yes, externally, it definitely, you can see there's differences there with the Leaf. It's got the more rounded lights, slightly more sort of curvier shape. But inside, it is basically, it's a Renault 5, and it's got all the Renault 5 switchgear, even the headliner with those distinctive little squares in it, straight out of a Renault 5. The windscreen has, the little, the famous cockerel in there that was engraved. And of course, what did they say to you, Tom, when you questioned them about that? Didn't they come up with some story about, it's origami or something?
Yeah, so
it's
an origami cockerel, so it's a combination of Japanese and French.
So which just literally was like hand you the straws there for you to clutch on, team. And I do wonder whether is this going to become an issue going forward for Ford, in that they're not going to be able to get those unique models. And you look at the success, the Fiesta, the Escort, the original Capri, they were very unique and distinctive. Where you look at the Capri now, and I mean, quite frankly, it is not a Capri anymore. Does that matter, do you think, or is it just that we're so hung up, Andy, on these models from the past that actually
I think it matters. I think it matters that a brand is all about making a promise, and the promise is core to your intrinsic values. It's not core to somebody else's intrinsic values. So I think what the cross badging shows you is just how far the Western OEMs have fallen behind the Chinese. And therefore, I think it's very pragmatic in terms of catch up, and getting back into the market. And let's be honest, the Western brands have wasted 10 years, and they've got to catch up. So I think it's very pragmatic from that point of view, but it can't be the long-term aim. You've got to come back to your original, basically brand promise. And that's embodied in the way that you design the car, you execute the car, and the way that you sell the car. And yeah, I mean, basically, Capri, as an example, is an iconic brand that means so much to anybody that remembers Capris. and the current vehicle doesn't deliver on that promise.
I guess the flip side of that, Tom, is that we can, what are we going to get in return? So, we've perhaps seen, Bronco's going to come back. That's potentially one of the cars that's going to be built there. I mean, we're looking at the negative side of this, and there's no doubt that there is, in that kind of, like Andy was saying, that dilution of the brand, and of those marks that we know and love. But we could potentially see some positives out of this as well, could we?
Yeah, I think that there will be some. I mean, if there's a new Bronco, the Bronco in the US is quite a funky car. So I think a lot of people would welcome that here, that sort of off-roader chunky style. If they could, and the choice is having that based on a Geely or having it not at all, then people would probably have it based on the Geely. But I do wonder, and Andy, you might be able to answer this, if there's a cost advantage for Geely. I mean, obviously they get past the import restrictions, but is it cheaper to import cars from China still, or are the labour rates there now more expensive, and does it cost so much in shipping that it's actually going to be a cost saving for them to make the cars in Europe, even without the tariffs?
The industry uses different acronyms, but ultimately it's something called TDC, which is total delivered cost. And basically, it's cheaper to make stuff in China because the electricity and energy costs are lower, the labor costs are lower, the factories generally are set up to be more efficient. But you've then got to get those vehicles on a boat into Europe and through the tariff. And so what you do as a somebody running a car project is you look at the cost of the bit as it goes into the factory in Europe versus coming in directly from China, and you look at this TDC and you decide which is cheaper. And somebody will have done that calculation. Sometimes the pure calculation is also tempered by wanting to be a good citizen, or not wanting to stoke up any tensions, any trade tensions. So there can be some mitigating factors, but ultimately, car industry makes very thin margins per car, and so that TDC calculation is really, really key. So there's probably more advantages from Ford's point of view, and if they're smart, they'll use Geely to leapfrog back and catch up, and bring their own cars with it. If they're not smart, then basically this will just further help the Chinese with dominance in the European marketplace.
There's a real risk here, Andy, isn't there, that Ford simply end up really producing vans here in Europe, and that is it, and that everything else that they sell is no longer truly a Ford?
Yeah, and look, that if you project that risk forward, remember that Ford are competing in Europe with the Chinese, which means you need EV. If you look at Ford's home market, the United States, it's protected by tariff barrier, and it's protected basically with no Chinese brands. So it's not moving rapidly towards EV, and technologically, therefore, it's falling behind. If you project that forward, I mean, the move to EV is as sure as death and tax. I've said that many times. Simply, the laws of thermodynamics make it so. So the US industry or the US marketplace will eventually adopt EVs, and what Ford and GM, they might be enjoying the relief from the Chinese, but actually it means that they're not getting the exercise required to be competitive. They're not in a capitalistic type of international competition. And when they do, what they'll find is they're not lean, they're not hungry, they don't have the technology, and they'll start to lose out in their home market. And that's my great worry, that these great brands of Ford, GM, Chrysler, basically think they're being protected, but in fact, because they're not facing the brunt of the Chinese competition, are actually losing competitiveness.
And that's something that I know you and I have talked about, Andy. Tom, we've talked about is, this, you look at Kodak and the story of Kodak and how it just didn't switch to digital fast enough, and, who potentially could be Kodak of the car industry, there's no doubt, I think, in any of our minds that we will look back on this period of transition in, 10, 15, 20 years' time, and we will see some of the big names that have gone. Would you say, Andy, that, that there is potential that, Ford, may have gone when it comes to passenger cars?
Those car companies that don't pivot enough, those car companies that don't exploit the opportunities in front of them, those companies that don't learn to work with the Chinese, some of them won't make it, for sure. But I think in 20 years' time, the number of nameplates out there will be very similar to what it is today. Just the nameplates will be different. And we'll be used to seeing names that today aren't familiar, which will become household names in the future. Jayco already is, one of the best sellers in the UK. We didn't know that name even 12 months ago.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we look at BYD and Tom, again, it doesn't seem that long ago since we were chatting to BYD when they were first coming over to the UK, and, there were like 3 people working for BYD here, we knew them all, chatted to them all regularly. And last year they sold, I think it was just over 50,000 cars in the UK, which is more than Cupra, more than Tesla, more than Honda. So, we can't underestimate the growth strategies and how aggressive these brands tend to be. And I guess that leads me into this point, which is picking up on what you said there, Andy, which is when you look at nameplates. So we look at the brands that Geely owns, and operates, Volvo, Polestar, we've got Zeekr that's coming in Europe and is coming into the UK, stake in Aston Martin, Lotus. These are massive brands. Huge brands with huge history, some of them. Do you see a world in which this is perhaps some kind of, potential takeover of those marques and the brands that Ford, sells in Europe, like Fiesta, and that could literally become part of the Geely empire as well?
Some will be. Look, the soft underbelly of the Chinese is that, well, on the strength is the technology and the quality of the vehicles. The soft underbelly is I haven't really understood marketing and branding in Europe. There's the opportunity for our counterparts in the European industry to find the strengths and weaknesses and bring them together. Of course, the Chinese will try different methodologies. Buying a brand is one of it, but if you then don't follow that brand promise, and I suppose one could look to examples like Lotus. Lotus is fundamentally it's a lightweight sports car company, and that's its operating ethos. If you don't honor that brand value, then you lose the strength of that brand value. And I think, as was true of the Japanese in the 80s, as was true of the Koreans in the 90s, it's true of the Chinese now. You have to learn how to sell, and selling is not just about good products. It's also the messaging and the support that goes with it. And I think you're going to see BYD probably taking a different approach to SAIC, taking a different approach to Geely, but there will be a combination of some acquisition, some utilization of existing factory space, and some simply introducing their new brands.
Yeah. And Tom, that's not necessarily a bad thing, is it? We look what's happened with MG. I'm sure that many people out there have no idea who owns MG, but they've massively benefited from Chinese investment.
MG has obviously benefited enormously from the fact that people say, I know that brand. So if they're going to buy one of those cars, they have that comfort that they're buying something they know, in the same way they do in a supermarket. They buy Purcell rather than some brand they've never heard of. They'll automatically be more comfortable doing that. And I think MG has benefited enormously from that. But then you do see these brands like Jayco and BYD, who presumably are having to spend an absolute fortune in marketing for, I don't know, the borders around the football pitch, for example, to get people to recognise that name and get that same value. Whereas Ford doesn't have to do that. I think we've also seen brands like Mercedes, for example, who now have the enormous grille on the front of their electric cars because they want to capitalise on that history they've got, which the Chinese brands can't do yet. Andy, what do you think the value is of a brand that people recognise, and how much would a Chinese maker have to invest in order to become better than not to just sell on value?
Tom, you know that a retained customer is many times cheaper than a captured customer. So if you're having to put a lot of advertising into explaining what your brand is and your brand promise, then you're going to pay an awful lot more to win that customer. You remember, you're only making a few hundred dollars on the sale of a vehicle itself, if you're lucky. Most of the money that car makers make is made on the after sales and on the sales finance. Razor thin margins on the vehicle itself. So the cost of acquisition of that customer is really key. And if, as you say, if you have brand recognition, then it's really important. But ultimately, you'll be judged on living up to that brand promise. If you want to play, have a little bit of fun, go into your MG dealer and ask the dealer what MG stands for. It's always an interesting view on whether they've really understood what the brand is all about.
Do you think that deals like this, where Ford and Geely are coming together, are they good for the consumer? Is it going to be something that's going to have benefits, or do you think that it's just something that has a benefit for the two businesses?
No, look, I think it's great for the consumer. Basically competition brings down prices. The Chinese themselves have brought down the surface price of the vehicles. Until 1 or 2 years ago, the common myth was that electric cars are more expensive than internal combustion cars. And to some extent they were, because of economies of scale, weren't making enough. But the Chinese are leveraging their huge home market, where 50% of all car sales are now EV. They're leveraging that. They've got the costs down, and the competition of that has brought all costs down. The cheapest car in the UK right now, I think, is a Dacia Spring. It's an electric car. If you feature adjust, most electric cars are now the same price as their internal combustion engine counterparts, except that the good news is it's much, much cheaper to run an electric car. So we're moving from being an early adopter type of consumer to being one that is economically driven. It's just cheaper to drive an electric car, and that drives volume. And you get into a very positive loop then, because the higher the volume, the better the economies of scale, the lower the price. And I think that's what the Chinese competition has brought for us, in the same way that the Japanese brought that in the 80s with fuel efficient vehicles. We're seeing that repeat of history, and we know what that looks like.
One of the other things that was in the press release, which I thought I'd ask you about, is that Ford say that one of their new vehicles will be a multi-energy family crossover. And there are two elements to that. There's, first of all, the multi-energy. And what do you think that means, and why are car makers still producing, presumably, an internal combustion engine in these times? And also the family crossover part. Now, you were heavily involved in the Nissan Qashqai, which was 20 years ago in a couple of months. And it occurs to me that we're probably due a new genre of car, aren't we? There were estates, there were MPVs that all kind of came in and out of fashion, but the crossover seems to keep going. And if we are due a new genre of car, what do you think it will be?
New or a multi-energy vehicle is just a bit of a cop-out, to be honest. And I think it comes back to the fact you've got powertrains in the US which are pretty much staying with internal combustion engines. You've got Europe indecisive in terms of its date to move to electric cars, and you've got the largest market in the world, China, which is clearly electric. And so the compromise is that you do a plug-in hybrid or a hybrid, and it is absolutely a compromise, because whilst you can argue you're getting the best of both worlds, actually what you're doing is getting the worst of both worlds. You've got two powertrains in there that you're having to pay for, but that's what it means. It's a hedge, and one can argue its validity during a transition point. But honestly, I think we're beyond, in Europe, the transition point. It's obvious that we should be moving towards electrification, and there are so many compromises involved in creating those multi energy platforms. New genre of car. Yes, I love new genres of cars. I can tell you that the discussion on Qashqai started a lot longer than 20 years ago, and a fair time before the Renault-Nissan alliance. There's a whole story associated with that debate. But yes, it's looking for what the product planners would call white space, and how you can redefine a vehicle to a particular customer type. What I'm enthralled by is in China you can find a company called Li, Li, and they've reimagined the MPV. And whether you like it or not almost doesn't matter, but it redefines your perception of what an MPV might be. And I think great companies, great companies do that. They push the the envelope of what you can do. And what electrification does is, of course, it moves that big lump of metal out from the bonnet area, brings all of the powertrain below the waistline, and allows the designers many more degrees of freedom. I try to explore that, for example, with the Blade Glider, and at Nissan, and trying to reinvent what a sports car might look like. Lee, I can see doing that with with the MPV, and just maybe the not maybe, actually, for sure, there is an opportunity to do that with crossovers, and indeed. Sedans and hatchbacks. The whole concept of the electric platform allows you to make those reinventions.
Okay. The car that I would love, that the genre of car I'd love to see electrified, and we just haven't had enough of them yet, is the small two-seater sports car. How I would love an electric equivalent of, the MX-5, something like that. And I don't quite understand why we haven't. We're getting the small cars coming through. It wasn't that long ago that, you get in a conversation, and we used to count the number of small cars on under £30,000 on sale in the UK on one hand. And it was really frustrating. And of course, as you said, the economies of scale and battery development mean that, we've got, as you pointed out, Andy, Dactyl Spring, most affordable electric car in Britain, small, great little electric car. You've got the Twingo, you've got so many coming through. But why are we not getting, where's the new MX-5? Where are those small electric sports cars? What are the challenges with those, Andy?
There's a bravery is of course the one point. And by the way, small sports cars, generally speaking, don't make a lot of money. So you've got the combination of bravery and a lack of revenue coming back. You've also got some technical challenges like that of sound and the emotion that sound imparts. That said, I go back to that Blade Glider. Blade Glider today still remains for me the most fun car that I ever drove. It may not have been the outright best handling car, um, probably wasn't ultimately the fastest car, but in terms of overall engagement, drifting, having fun, that car was the most fun that I've really ever had in a car. And of course that speaks to exactly what the MX-5 used to be, and continue, should continue to be. It's about having fun at an affordable price, and the bucket loads of torque that an electric drive gives you makes it an ideal application for a sports car.
Yeah, I didn't drive the Blade Glider. It's one of my big regrets that I haven't, because it was a cracking car, and I think wasn't 0 to 62. It was definitely under the 5 seconds, so I don't think it was particularly slouchy. Although, of course, given the speeds we see today, it does seem a little slow, perhaps. Tom, did you ever drive a Blade Glider?
I didn't know. I think Margot Robbie drove it, but I didn't get the chance. But
Damn.
I might be able to solve that problem for you. So I know how we can get into a Blade Glider.
I think that's a video for another day. Let's go and do that. Go on, Tom.
No, I was going to ask what sort of car you would like to see, Andy, and it has to be realistic of would it sell. But do you think there's a niche out there of electric car that we're all waiting for?
My great regret actually is that the Blade Glider didn't make it through to production. I would love to solve for that, a beautiful but redefined sports car that allows everybody to understand how an electric platform unleashes the designers and allows them to just so many more degrees of freedom. So more likely I end up doing things like buses and trucks, because they're very practical applications of electric drives. But I've always yearned to finish off that blade glider.
Tom, what about you? Are you with us? Andy and I are firmly going for the small, fun electric sports car.
Well, no, I'm in the opposite direction, really. I'd quite like to see something. I mean, I'm excited for the new 2CV, but I fear it won't be anything like the old 2CV that's a very basic, simple car, which can get upgraded and fixed. A bit like the Citroen Ollie concept was. I thought that was just brilliant. And that gives me some hope for the future, that we won't just keep throwing away cars every 3 years and getting the latest new thing, and we can upgrade it and have some fun again.
Yeah, the Ollie would be good. Listen, let's wrap things up by just bringing us back to the Ford Geely deal. And Andy, good or a bad thing for Ford? Who's going to be the winner out of this? Is it going to be Geely or is it going to be Ford?
Look, the Chinese are going to be winners. Not all of them, but they're going to be winners in this. They're going to be at least as dominant in Europe as the Japanese and the Koreans have been in the past. So there will be losers, but they've got a 10-year start on us. It's going to be all about those that survive, the legacy brands that survive. And if Ford is smart, they'll leverage the collaboration with Geely, and use at the same time the opportunity to redefine their brand with their own vehicles. And if they do that, they'll be one of the winners, and it's mutually beneficial for both. If they don't do that, then ultimately you'll see basically Geely continue to expand, continue to take the factory space in Valencia, and eventually push Ford out.
Well, what a thought that would be. Andy Palmer, as always, thank you for joining us with your insight. Let us know what you think. Please drop us a comment. You can email us, podcast@electrifying.com. What do you make of the Geely Ford thing? Good thing or bad thing? You've had our thoughts today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.